Hello and welcome to another episode of the Editorial. I'm Rory, I'm a writer for TLDR Global and other channels as well. Joined as always for the Editorial by Zach Michaelis, the Editor-in-Chief.
That was good, yeah.
Thank you. First time as well. If you've watched the Editorial before, this is kind of where we just go over recent videos, in theory every 2 weeks, but I think it's been a bit longer than that.
Yeah, although we're trying to get back into the rhythm.
Yeah. Usually as the host, I'll just take a kind of step back and let you talk about what's gone well, what's gone wrong, anything we need to apologise for or explain. So yeah, I will throw it over to you.
So this is slightly surreal. I mean, this is sort of the this is what we've been aspiring to get to on the Editorial ever since we started doing it. But we didn't actually have a controversial video in basically the past month.
Wow.
That's not to say it's been error-free. We have quite a few errors, mainly like small spelling errors, the occasional narration error, but by my count we have something like 5, 6, 7 spelling errors across all channels on over the past month or so, which we did the last Editorial. Perhaps the most glaring error is actually just entirely my fault. I did a video on Poland's demographic crisis where in the original format I said that Tusk was the president, which is obviously not true. He's the prime minister. But now it sounds like a brag, I don't mean like this, but we did what we promised we would do in the past, and we took it down, edited it, and then we uploaded it. So the new version is sort of correctly edited. But no, since in the past month or so, we actually haven't had a video that has fallen below the relevant like-dislike threshold. So regular viewers of the Editorial will know that the way that we basically evaluate whether or not a video is controversial, something's wrong with it, is it falls below our normal like-dislike ratio, which is about 97%. And we've had a couple below 97%, but none significantly so, and not for any sort of glaring structural errors, which is good. It's going to be a very short podcast, but it's nice to see. I nonetheless think there are a couple of things that are worth talking about. Although there's going to be less apologising on this Editorial than usual because they're not really things to apologise for. It's more just sort of because I wanted to talk about them out loud a little bit, and maybe if you guys are willing, just get a little bit of feedback on what people think about them. And those are basically two things. One is the podcasts, which we've started uploading to TLDR UK and TLDR Global. Me and Rory just did a TLDR Global podcast. And the other is we've got a bit of pushback on EU from some of our more regular viewers from focusing too much on immigration, basically. Not cultural issues as a whole, but specifically immigration. And arguably sort of people think that immigration is sort of a right-wing talking point, and in selecting that topic we're sort of demonstrating some sort of right-wing bias. It's very rare for us to be accused of right-wing bias as opposed to left-wing bias, but there you go, I thought it'd be worth mentioning. So then we should start with podcasts. We've basically apropos of the fact that YouTube have introduced a new podcast section to channels, we have now moved the podcasts onto the respective channels. I think that's confused some people, but we're doing it because we basically think that we're quite proud of the podcast, and we think that it's something that we'd like to get out to more sort of regular channel viewers. We appreciate that it's not the same as our normal content, and in many ways it's not as information dense, it's not as sort of polished, and I appreciate if you're not into that. But yeah, that was the thinking behind that. It probably presents more as a normal video than we expected. I mean, there's not as much of a differentiation between a YouTube podcast and a YouTube main channel video, but we're going to keep putting it up there for the next week or so and see what people think about them. So yeah, I thought I'd just explain the rationale behind that decision. On the podcasts, I should say that just because of the way they're structured and the fact that they're sort of essentially conversational, it's always going to be the case that they're not as they're not as neutral necessarily. We might let some of our biases slip that would normally be caught in the editorial process when you're writing a script. But I think we will still aspire to being entirely neutral on the podcast. We might make mistakes here and there, but just to draw that line in the sand, mark it for posterity, we will aspire to be as neutral as we are on the main channel videos on the podcast. Is that fair, you think?
Yeah. The other thing to note on podcasts, we have effectively doubled our podcast output. Actually no, because we have the Editorial as well. So we're doing two kind of news podcasts. Yes, yeah, that's right. 2 news podcasts a week, one UK, one global. I saw maybe it's just 1 or 2 comments, so I don't know if you want to address it, but it's people saying 2-hour-long podcasts is too much for 1 week. And to be fair, sometimes they do get quite long, but we are making an effort to make them shorter on.
Yeah, for what it's worth, this is entirely my bad. I have a conspicuous habit of going on little rants and monologues and down little rabbit holes. I am trying my hardest to keep it nice and short, so hopefully future podcasts will be a bit shorter. So I think that's podcast. That's sort of just a bit of housekeeping on podcast. I don't think there's anything substantial to say there. I guess the next bit then is talk a bit about immigration, which we've covered a lot on EU recently. I am sympathetic to the idea that there's a sense in which you can talk too much about immigration, but sort of overstate its salience just by virtue of the fact that you're selecting to talk about too much. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't think we're overdoing immigration in a meaningful sense. And I also think that it's not, when we're doing those videos, we're not taking a line on it. We're not saying anything normative. We're not saying like it's a good thing or a bad thing. We're just explaining like why it's become a politically salient topic in various EU countries and across the EU as a whole. And another reason I think it's an important thing to cover is that I think for quite structural reasons, it's only going to become a bigger topic as time goes on. I think firstly, that's demographic. Europe as a whole is aging, and that means that the European Commission estimates that you need 1 million immigrants every year to sort of maintain a stable population pyramid. And the other is basically like climate change and geopolitical instability, which just means that we're going to see more immigration in the coming years. And so if you think it's like a hot topic at the moment, wait 5 years, I can almost guarantee that it'll be an even hotter topic. So I think that sort of laying the groundwork for what I see as sort of an inevitable political struggle over that topic, I think is important, and basically hopefully educating people on like the dynamics of the immigration debate, both nationally, both within countries, but perhaps more interestingly, like at the European level, because the immigration debate within the EU, it sort of interacts with a whole lot of pre-existing problems in the EU. It interacts with sort of the fact that border countries receive obviously far more immigrants than sort of like Central European countries. It interacts with the fact that different European countries have different like age population pyramids and different sort of like demographic issues. And it interacts just simply with the question of power in the European European Union, like who calls the shots in the European Union. And also the other thing is that the European Union's changing attitudes to immigration, obviously a symptom of national politics, symptom of the fact that across Europe, sort of anti-immigration sentiment is rising, and that has changed sort of the internal debate within the EU about immigration. So broadly speaking, I basically think I understand those anxieties, and we are very conscious of them. We try not to over-focus on any individual topic too much. But when it comes to immigration, I think as long as we cover it nice and neutrally and avoid saying anything too normative, basically saying anything prescriptive and saying you should think this or you should think that, which I think we do, then we're fine. And also I think it is an important thing to get on top of, because I imagine it's only going to become more important in the months, let alone years to come. So I think annoyingly that is everything for this editorial. I mean, that is the shortest editorial ever. If there's anything we've missed, please do say, because it's very possible that I've missed something controversial that happened and went past me. And I should have done this before, but I do apologise for the Poland video. That was a very stupid mistake on my part, and it's very sloppy, and hopefully that will be avoided in the future. But I think that is everything in the editorial, and hopefully we'll be back in 2 weeks' time to, I don't know, talk about whatever we've ballsed up then, or nothing. But who knows? So you say goodbye, I guess. You're the host.
Thank you for watching. Oh, sorry.